and welcome to our first live edition of CBB Review Studio. I am Dan Siegel, joined by Mat Mlodzinski and Ben Anderson. These guys will be joining me the entire college basketball season. Guys, college basketball starts tomorrow. We've got CBB rank 5 through 1 we're going to talk about today. We're going to actually do some game picks for the first time since last April. This is exciting. How you guys feeling?
Feeling absolutely amazing. Finally, it feels like it's been weeks and weeks building up to this.
Yeah,
but we are finally here, the new college basketball season.
Absolutely. I cannot wait. We got a lot of great games to talk about. But first, let's talk about those top 5 teams in our CBB rank.
Yeah, number 5, we've got the UConn Huskies, defending national champions who are looking to be the first back-to-back tournament winners in nearly 20 years. Now, there's a reason why there's a lot of teams that have won national championships and usually take like small steps down, not like drastic steps, but a little bit of championship hangover. And it's not just a coincidence. I feel like they often just lose a lot of the top players from that team. UConn is not immune to that, but they have Donovan Clingan, who's going to potentially be relied upon, like you said, to take a Zach Edey-like jump in production. What do you think of this UConn team? Is 5 a fair spot to put them, a little bit behind that top tier that we'll talk about in a couple minutes?
Yeah, I think it's a good spot for Connecticut. I think you have to give the respect to the national champions, no matter what they may lose, no matter what they may gain, whatever. You know, obviously there's a lot of turnover with this team in losing Adama Sanogo, in losing Jordan Hawkins. But when it gets down to it, it's still the national champions, the defending champs. You still have players from that team, especially in Tristan Newton, who played a big role for the Huskies' run to a title last year. And they've got Donovan Clingan, a guy who didn't play a lot of minutes last year, but you look at his per 40 minutes, and it could be something special if he follows in the route that Zach Edey did at Purdue. So I think all that being said, definitely a great UConn roster, and you got to give a lot of credit to Dan Hurley, because I don't think a lot of people picked UConn to win it all last year, even heading into March. I mean, they were a 4 seed heading into March. So for them to be able to do that, you got to give credit to the coach, and when it's a coach that brings you there and he's still there, it means that UConn is still going to be at the top of the country.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Matt, for the most part. I do want to mention one player that you didn't touch on that left the program, which is Andre Jackson. And I think he was just such an important piece as that connecting wing that I'll be interested to see how the Huskies operate when he's not on the floor. But they do bring in a lot of new pieces. One piece in particular is Cam Spencer, transfer from Rutgers, who can shoot the ball basically lights out. As you can see on the screen, he was 43% from 3 last year on many attempts per game. Like, so it's not just a small sample size. I think that'll be a good replacement for Jordan Hawkins. But I think, like you said, ultimately the biggest idea here is whether Donovan Clingan can increase his production as he increases his usage rate and his minutes per game, right? If he can do that, then Connecticut has a chance to be back in that national title conversation. But if he doesn't do that, I'm a little bit more skeptical on their prospects in a really tough Big East.
Yeah, one good thing about UConn, I'm looking at their schedule right now. They have 3 complete bye games to open up the year. I'm talking about games they'll be well over 20-point favorites, and they got Northern Arizona, Stonehill, and Mississippi Valley State. So ease into the schedule a little bit. They will play, I think, Gonzaga and UNC at some point later on, but it's a good start for someone who's just trying to establish a new roster out there. But number 4 on CBB rank, we've got Michigan State. I have a couple takes on this. I want to let you guys go first. I'll start with Ben this time. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm extremely confident that this Michigan State team will finish in the top 3 of the Big Ten. I don't think there's any question in my mind that there are 3 teams better in that conference to be able to outlast them in the regular season, because they're just built to win games in the regular season, in my opinion. They have 2 very reliable players running in the backcourt, when Tyson Walker and AJ Hogard. You have Malik Hall in the front court, as well as Madi Sissoko, and then an absolutely outstanding freshman class when you consider Tone Carr, Jeremy Fears, Xavier Booker as well. I think they have all the pieces to make sure that they succeed in the regular season, especially as they're bringing their new freshmen in. The question for me is whether they have the ceiling to make it to a Final Four in a national championship. You should never count out Tom Izzo making the Final Four, of course. But like I say, we haven't seen a Big Ten champion or Michigan State champion since 2000. So that's always something to be a little bit skeptical of. But I do think that they do have a chance to make the Final Four. I think it's going to be a fantastic regular season team, just like a team we'll talk about later in the episode.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Michigan State kind of, they get this ranking for a lot of reasons. You see right there on the page, key players, Tyson Walker, AJ Hoggard, Malik Hall. There are a few teams in the country that are able to bring back guys like that. Some teams bring back one guy like that. Some teams bring back two. Michigan State brings back three guys who can be, really big going forward. I think the biggest thing, though, about Michigan State, and we've seen this over the past few years, is Tom Izzo. Can Tom Izzo be the guy, that Michigan State needs him to be? Obviously, over the years, he's brought in recruits, he's brought in great players, but can he really bring this Michigan State team over the hump? I believe that he can. There's no reason in my mind, there's no doubt in my mind that Tom Izzo can't do this. He's done it year after year, but there's all this talent right here. We need to see this come to fruition, and I'm excited about the prospect of Michigan State being the best they've been in quite a few years. They were pretty good last year, but they've got some ballers this year, and I think Michigan State can really rival another team out of the Big Ten.
Yeah, one thing we really haven't emphasized enough is the fact of just the leap that we are expecting them to take. Because last year, what were they, a 7 seed, right? They were fringe top 25 at the end of the regular season, and then now we're just expecting them to take that jump to the top 5. Now, I might hold off on that a little bit and put them in maybe the 7 to 10 range. There were a few teams we talked about last episode that I liked a little bit better. But that being said, there's always programs that make major jumps. And if it has to be Michigan State, like, that's as good of a program to pick as anybody. And they're, like you guys said, I don't need to reiterate it. Just the talent there is so good this year, even compared to last year. So 4 is fair. I might go a little bit lower, but I understand it. Moving on now to number 3, though. And this is a team that I think I feel a little bit differently on than the rest of you guys, the rest of maybe the public. We're talking about the Purdue Boilermakers, and everybody has this bad taste in their mouth off of Purdue, and for good reason, right? They lost to the 16 seed last year to end the year Fairleigh Dickinson. I still think there's an argument, a valid argument, to be made for Purdue to be the number 1 preseason team in the country. And why is that? Well, they returned pretty much everyone from a team that was top 5 essentially the entire year last year. And that includes the National Player of the Year. So I know a lot of our preseason expectations get skewed a little bit by NCAA tournament results, and some of that's for good reason, some that's for bad reason. But I think there's a valid argument to put Purdue number 1. Personally, I would have them number 2, right below the team we will talk about at number 1.
Sorry, I muted myself. I'll take this one first. Purdue, Dan, I do think is arguably the best team in the country.
Yeah.
You guys know as well as anyone that just because you lose to a 16 seed in the first round of the NCAA tournament doesn't mean that you can't come back next year and be the best team in the country. I have no doubt in my mind that Virginia was still one of the top 5 or 10 teams in the country the year they lost to UMBC. I stand the same way with Purdue last year. It was one game, a game that if they played 10 times, Purdue wins 9 times out of 10. Fairleigh Dickinson came in last year with a game plan, and they executed it to perfection against Purdue. I don't think that happens again if they play. I think if they play today, like literally today or tomorrow, on the first day, let's say that's like the first matchup of the season, I think the Boilermakers win that game by 30 points. I really do. I think that it was just a moment and a time and place right there. I think Purdue has learned from that, kind of like Virginia, how they learned from the UMBC loss. And Zach Edey is too good to not make sure this Purdue team doesn't reach the Final Four. We've talked about plenty of great Purdue teams with Carson Edwards, guys in the past, you name it. This Purdue team is arguably the most talented because we know what Zach Edey is capable of. These guys last year that were freshmen have now grown. Let's look back at that roster one more time, the key players. I mean, Fletcher Lawyer, Braden Smith were fantastic last year. They're going to be even better this year. I'm confident that Purdue makes it to the Final Four. If I had to pick a team right now to win it all, I'm picking the Boilermakers.
You know what? I don't know if I'd go that far. I do agree that, this is a top 5 team, I think unquestionably, based off of what you see, what they returned, and also the fact that the Fairleigh Dickinson loss required the worst offensive performance probably in all of 2023 from Purdue for that to happen. They just missed so many shots that I think they would normally make, especially from Lawyer and Smith, that you are able to visualize a team that easily makes it past there and probably further out. Now, the question for me is, Matt mentioned this, is how large is the jump that these sophomores are going to make? And I'm speaking on Lawyer, Smith, but also players like Trey Kaufman-Wren, right? What does it look like for them to come back and improve season over season? We know what Zach Edey is going to look like. That's an easy question. That's an easy question to be answered. The question is, what are the other players going to look like? And I'm not quite sure we're going to see a jump that makes it so large that you can guarantee that Purdue is going to make the Final Four, because unlike some of the other teams we're going to talk about in this area, Purdue does have a way you can beat them. And it's a pretty clear way you can beat them, in my opinion, right? And that may not work for one game like it did against Fairleigh Dickinson, but will it work for 6 straight games, right? Is Purdue going to be able to avoid 6 straight game plans that you can sort of see how this team could lose? I don't know, right? And that's sort of where my hesitation lies, and probably a lot of people's hesitation lies as well in March with Matt Painter.
Well, I mean, to be fair, they would become the first 1 seed or the first team after losing to a 16 seed to not bounce back and win a national championship. So that would be history in itself as well. But no, I'm with you there. Let's move on, though. Number 2, we've got the Duke Blue Devils, who I think – at the very least, this team is extremely high in terms of floor, because I look at Duke and their roster, obviously really good. I'm slightly hesitant because, talent has rarely been an issue. And when talent has been an issue in a couple years in the recent past, they've gone down a little bit. But I think 2 is a fair spot for them. What do you guys think of Duke?
Yeah, this is my number 1 team in the country. And I think that when you look at the team, what sticks out to me is not only the talent, but the age, the experience that you bring back, right? 3 players that had potential NBA, arguably 4, that had potential NBA draft prospects are back at Filipowski, Tyrese Proctor, and Mark Mitchell. And then you have a guy like Jeremy Roach, who's a senior, that's coming back to run the point. I just think that's such a well-rounded core that even if only a couple of their talented freshmen like Jared McCain or Sean Stewart or Caleb Foster, even if a couple of them pop, you still have a fantastic core rotation of about 7 players to rely on throughout the season. And if you look back at Duke's most successful teams, albeit that's under Coach K, but Duke's most successful teams in 2015, you had a mix of young and new, right, with Okafor versus Tyus Jones or Quinn Cook, like returners there. In 2010, you had Kyle Singler coming back as well. I think this is a similar Duke team in that mold. And for that reason, if I'm betting on one team to win the national championship that I think has the best mix of talent and experience, I do think it's Duke this year.
Yeah, that's a very good take there. I think you hit it on the nail there. I know that I said Purdue just a few minutes ago would be my national championship pick. If I had to take a second one, it would be Duke. I agree that they should be a top 3 team in the country. I think it starts, and I'll backtrack a little bit. The thing that bothers me about Duke, I almost feel bad for their fans in a way, like the true Duke fans, not the fake Yankees, Cowboys Duke fans, but the true Duke fans. Because you look at this roster here, and you got returners, right? But very rarely does a Duke team bring back a freshman who was as talented as Kyle Filipowski was last year. I mean, he was the best freshman in ACC basketball. and he's back. I think that's gone way under the radar because I think we've looked at a lot of other storylines in college basketball. Some players that might be better. Filipowski's right up there. And for Duke to be able to bring him back to this roster, I think it kind of is being not talked about as much as it should be. Of course, Ben, you mentioned Jeremy Roach, Tyrese Proctor, Mark Mitchell, tons of other guys on this Duke squad. John Shire continues to recruit, continues to make sure that Duke is a high-level basketball program. And we're seeing it unfold right here. But, I mean, the big thing for me is bringing back a guy like Filipowski who could have gone and no one would have batted an eye. He was a one-and-done player when he got to Duke. It was a surprise to me that he stayed. And Duke needs to be taken more serious than they are. It's kind of a prisoner of the moment thing because Duke is always rated highly, and everyone's always like, oh, is it just because they're bringing in a freshman class? That's not the story this year. This is a legit Duke team. We don't have as many questions about them as we do in other years. We know that they're going to be good.
No, yeah, I want to reiterate what both of you said because the depth is important, and a lot of Duke teams that have had earlier exits in the NCAA tournament, even despite strong regular seasons, it's part of it has been lack of depth, and then just the fact that I think they're just a safe pick to finish inside the top 10, top 15. The three teams we talked about earlier today, maybe Purdue's a safe pick, but Michigan State, I could definitely see a world where they don't live up to the hype. UConn national championship hangover roster has some question marks. I don't see that with Duke. And to be fair, I don't see that with this next team we're going to talk about. Finally reaching number 1 in our CBB rank, which you guys could have guessed by now, the Kansas Jayhawks. And for me, it's the same logic as Purdue, but just to a larger extent why I would place them number 1. When you're ranking preseason teams, it's about what have you done last year? What do you return? And not only does Kansas check both of those boxes, but they add, Ben, you pointed out this on the slide, arguably the most accomplished transfer in the portal era. They are adding former All-American Hunter Dickinson to their roster, which is already stacked to begin with. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, I can take this for starters. I don't think Kansas should be number 1. I hate to be a Debbie Downer. And I'm not living in, the whole thing about how Illinois beat them in that charity exhibition the other day. I'm really going from the standpoint of if Hunter Dickinson was that good, why wasn't Michigan that good last year? And it's going to have to be the same thing this year around because Kansas did lose a lot. Unlike a Duke team, unlike a Purdue team, Jalen Wilson is gone. So it's not like Hunter Dickinson is joining an already elite Kansas team. He's joining a Kansas team with some question marks. Don't get me wrong. DeJuan Harris, Kevin McCullough, both going to be great players. Both are going to be, guys that are going to carry this Kansas team. They're going to be the favorite in the Big 12. They should be. But I'm going to compare it to Anthony Davis, right? Hunter Dickinson and Anthony Davis, 2 different skill sets. I'm going to put that out there right now. I'm not comparing, the way that they play the game together. But Anthony Davis was on the Pelicans, and everyone kind of said, oh, yeah, he's a top 5 player in the NBA. He comes over to the Lakers, and you expect the Lakers to be this championship team. They obviously win a championship. But my one thing about Anthony Davis was if he was a top 5 player in the league, why couldn't the Pelicans get out of the first round of the NBA playoffs? If you're a top 5 player, you make sure that happens. The same thing can be said about Hunter Dickinson. If he is that good of a player, he would have gotten Michigan at least to the NCAA tournament and a couple of rounds past that. Obviously, a lot of things happen behind the scenes. There's, a lot of differences between college and the NBA. So I don't want to go too far, and I'm not calling out Hunter Dickinson. He is an elite player, but I need to see more from him. And I didn't see that throughout his career at Michigan, at least him being a winner.
Yeah, I think that I'm less hesitant on Dickinson's potential at Kansas than you are. I think that he wasn't always put in the best situations at Michigan, and because of that, he may have not been able to maximize his talent as much as he will in Lawrence with the best coach in the country at this point in Bill Self, right? Regardless of whatever you think about the NCAA violations, all that, like on court, he's one of the best in the league to do it, right? I think more of my hesitation with Kansas is the depth that we're looking at of the roster, because this starting 5 of Harris, Dickinson, McCullough, KJ Adams, and then pick whoever of Nick Timberlake or Marco Jackson. That's a fantastic starting five, the best starting five in the country. But then after that, right, I'm a little worried about what that's going to look like. Parker Brown comes in from Santa Clara, but it's not like he was lighting the place up at Santa Clara, right, for the Broncos. And then you'll have a great six man and whoever doesn't start between Timberlake and Marco Jackson. But then it gets kind of light pretty quickly. And that's sort of where I'm worried about it in terms of the regular season, especially in the Big 12, where it's so competitive every single night. I think that they're going to lose a few games that maybe they probably shouldn't have and end up with a few more losses than we expect going into Selection Sunday. Now, depth doesn't matter as much in the NCAA tournament because you're playing your best guys, right? So maybe they come back around and say, okay, we actually are the best team in the country because of this small core that they have that's going to be on the court at all times for them. But that's just something to consider. And that's why I rank them slightly lower. I still think they're number 2 in my opinion, but that's why I like Duke just a little bit more.
I say, I don't know. Like, also, you pointed out on the slide, they were mediocre shooting team last year. Like, that's definitely going to be an issue that could potentially hurt them in March, but I just don't have those same hesitations about Dickinson either. I think he was in a bad situation. We are going to talk about Michigan later. I think they're in one of our game picks, but I have Kansas number 1. Do you want to get into those game picks, guys?
Let's do it.
Let's go for it.
All right, so we've got 7 games that we're going to pick each week. Then each of us will make an upset pick. This will be a contest that we'll keep track of throughout the year. So our first game, we'll go in chronological order here. So we got Kansas State and USC. I'll switch up the order each time so we're not the same person giving their pick first every time. But I'll start with you, Matt, for the first pick game. So what do you think? Kansas State versus USA.
First off, no clue. Just because of everything going on with Naquan Tomlin, Bronny James, both sides kind of dealing with, what are their rosters going to be throughout the season. I'm going to go with USC in this game, though, because I feel like Kansas State just lost a little bit too much from last year. They're going to try to replace it, but they made an elite run last year. I think USC has it this time around. Even without a Bronny James, there's too much talent for the Trojans.
Yeah, I agree with you, Matt, here. I just think if Naquan Tomlin was a go, right, and nothing had happened in the past week or so that we don't really know about, right? I don't want to speculate on what that looks like. But if they were at full strength, it might be more of a game. But Tomlin was just such an important piece for the Wildcats last year, and especially with a team that doesn't have as much turnover as the Trojans do, I'm a little bit worried about Kansas State's ability right out of the gate. So I'm going to go with you and pick USC as well.
I'm going Kansas State, actually. I think, yes, I did acknowledge that Tomlin is suspended, but USC is very banged up in that front court, and that center spot was something I was very concerned about. I talked about that in the USC episode. I think both of their 2 top centers are questionable for Monday, including Page, who we projected in the starting lineup. So just for that reason, I'm going Kansas State. It's a matter of splitting hairs here because the line is under 3, but that's my pick right there. Our next game, I'll pick this one first. We got Auburn and Baylor. Honestly, I'm just another game that we're splitting hairs again. So whatever team is favored, if I had to bet on this game, I'm probably picking the underdog. So if Baylor's -1.5 by the time I get around to betting on this game, I'll probably pick Auburn. That being said, I'm just, when in doubt, going the home team. So I'll go Baylor, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on this game? We'll go to bed next.
Yeah, so one note here is that it's actually a neutral site game. It's in South Dakota.
Okay.
It's at the Pentagon, so I don't know if that changes your idea or anything, but I just think Baylor has a little bit more coming back for them. I really do like the core that they bring back of Jalen Bridges and Jonathan Tchamwa in the front court, and then I do think their guards are talented as well. Even though they lost a bunch, you still have Jacoby Walter, who I think will be an instant impact freshman, as well as Ray J. Dennis coming in from Toledo. So first game, I'm leaning towards Baylor, but I wouldn't be surprised either way.
I think there's going to be a lot of scoring, I'll tell you that much. Ray J. Dennis, excited to see what he does with Baylor. Same can be said about Denver Jones, averaged over 20 a game at Florida International last year. He's with Auburn now. I like Auburn to win this game. I just think the Tigers, they're obviously a middle-of-the-pack team last year, but with Broom on the inside, with Katie Johnson, guys like that, I think Auburn overall has a little bit more of a complete team, and Baylor has a few pieces that I'm waiting to see how they're going to be. If this game was played in January, I'd pick the Bears.
Okay. All right, game 3, we got St. Mary's and New Mexico. St. Mary's at home for this one. We'll start with you, Matt. I kind of have a feeling where you're going with this based on what I've discussed with you in the offseason, but let me know.
Yeah, no, I mean, and trust me, I do like the St. Mary's team, and Randy Bennett's done a great job. But if you remember correctly, I did say a couple weeks ago on this podcast that the New Mexico Lobos are giving me a reason to travel to New Mexico. Of course, this game not in New Mexico, but I will still be watching it, and I will still be saying that New Mexico is a potential, what did I say, Final Four team? I'll say it as crazy as that. Who cares? We're one day away. We got to have fun here. New Mexico's winning this game.
I am with Matt on this one. We were all three on this podcast, all hyping up New Mexico, and I got to stick with my word and what I said back then. I just think that the guards here are so explosive. And with a good defensive team in St. Mary's, I think you have the game breakers that you need to beat the Gales. And I think you see that, especially when they play Gonzaga in particular, but whenever they play a team with just such high talent levels that as New Mexico, I think that the Lobos have a really good shot to walk into Moraga and take the W here.
See, this might be a little gamesmanship, but I'm actually picking St. Mary's. I'm definitely equally, or maybe not as much on Matt, but equally on the New Mexico hype train as Ben is. And I also think that the WCC is a little bit overrated. I think St. Mary's is overrated. That being said, I'm still picking the Gales at home. I think they're just a superior team. And all three could be true at the same time, right? New Mexico's not getting enough love. St. Mary's is getting a little bit too much love. St. Mary's is still a little bit better than New Mexico, right? I think that's fair to say. And also, by the way, Jalen House, I believe, is also banged up, the guard for New Mexico. So that went into my decision a little bit too. Next game, we've got Duke and Arizona. I'll go first for this one. I'm going to pick Duke. I think it's just a safer pick to pick Duke early on in the season. They always play well in these games. Early on, they usually play a really high-profile game pretty much every year. They don't always win, but I think it's safer because I don't really remember a time where Duke went out in like the first couple games of the season, played a high-profile opponent, and dropped a dud. So I'm going Duke.
Yeah, it's at Cameron Indoor. And I just told you that Duke was the number one team in the country for me. Yeah. So I've got to stick with my guns here. I think Duke wins this one pretty comfortable. I would actually pick them to cover the 5.5. This is a line we got from Torvik because the betting odds aren't out yet. But I think I just really like it. Also, I'm a little bit lower on Arizona than the two of you are, I think.
I just think it's funny that Caleb Love transfers to Arizona and he's got Duke in like his first week of college basketball. What a storyline. What a storyline that is. Is it scripted? I don't know. What's not scripted is the fact that Duke's going to win this game. I agree. I agree with you, Dan. Don't get me wrong. Umar Ballo, great player for Arizona, but like their guard situation with, Kylan Boswell is their projected starting point guard. I don't know if that's going to be enough against like Jeremy Roach, Tyrese Proctor, all these great Duke players. Duke wins, but it's going to be close, though. It's going to be close.
Oh, absolutely. All right. Next game, this one, I believe Friday night, is Bennett and mine, Virginia Cavaliers playing against the Florida Gators. I believe this is taking place in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, actually, you know what, Ben, yeah, you go first for this one.
Look, I have no idea. If I'm being really honest, I have no idea. Both of these teams have so much new talent incoming that it's very hard to predict if we haven't seen them play on the court in a real game. Hopefully I get a better idea of what the Who's look like when I go see them tomorrow versus Tarleton State, but obviously Florida's a step up in competition. I think I will take Virginia just because I think they have the best player on the court in Reese Beekman, and I think that means a lot to me, right? Especially as a point of attack defender going against Zion Pullen, who is a great player in his own right, but is coming from UC Riverside, I believe. So it's a step up in competition for him. So that's something to consider. I'll take the Hoos in a neutral site game.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I am also going to take Virginia. I feel like last year I was pretty high on Florida, and it's because they had a lot of transfers that came in, and then they didn't really do much for them. And they've got the same thing this year, minus Colin Castleton, who I've mentioned before I think was a little bit overrated with the Gators. He really never got to his total potential, but he's still going to be a big loss. You mentioned it. Reese Beekman, probably the best player on the court for the Virginia Cavaliers. I think he's going to have an awesome season. And I really want to see how Jordan Minor does. I mean, that's a guy, him and Andrew Rohde, a couple of transfers. I know you could say the same thing about Florida. Both these teams brought in great mid-major transfers. Something tells me Tony Bennett is going to get them more ready to play, especially for this game.
I'm actually going Gators. I think the Hoos are definitely a little bit underestimated in the offseason for like the millionth time in a row. But I think they figure it out actually this year over time rather than right away. Also, we've talked about this in the Florida episode. I think Colin Castleton, while he was a heck of a player, did not really fit the scheme, the offensive system that Todd Golden wanted to have. So I don't think it's as big a loss as people are making it out to be. I really think Florida improves this year. So I'm going Florida by a narrow margin here. We've got our next game, Tennessee at Wisconsin. Matt, you go first here.
Yeah, great. Wow, I really like both these teams because they both have just so many like senior veteran players. Obviously, with Zakai Ziegler, Santiago Vescovi on the Vols, you see a Wisconsin team that really only lost one rotation player from last year. So great players on both sides of the ball. I do think Tennessee's the better team, but this game is at Wisconsin, so I will go with the Badgers at home over Tennessee. A Badgers team that I'm high on, and I think they kind of, captured the attention of the college basketball nation with a win against a great Vols team.
I think I'm going to disagree with you here, Matt. I think I'm going to take the Volunteers, pending, of course, the health of both Vescovi and Ziegler, which is an interesting point to make. I don't think that Wisconsin is the type of team that can beat Tennessee. I think if you look at how Tennessee's built, they are built to grind you down, right, and just sort of make you crumble at the end. And I think that Wisconsin doesn't have the firepower offensively to be able to counteract that and sort of gain the edge early and keep that edge the entire time. For that reason, I'm going with the Volunteers. I think that I'm very scared to play Tennessee early in the season this year.
I'm going to go with Wisconsin with Matt here. One thing I do want to note, do we think that over-under line of 141 seems a little high, or is it just me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just making sure we're on the same page here. This strikes me as a game in like the high 50s, low 60s, but we'll see. There's a reason the games are played. Last game we will be previewing, Missouri and Memphis, the Battle of the Tigers. For me, there's too much uncertainty for the Memphis Tigers. You got Hardaway suspended. You just found out that DeAndre Williams will not be playing. I think Quinterly's banged up. And I'm on Missouri. I think this program is really improving. So I'm going Missouri in this one.
I think for me, I'm going to go Memphis because they just have so much talent, even losing DeAndre Williams, even without Penny Hardaway as their coach. They still have players on that team that scare me. I think Caleb Mills, although the transfer to Florida State didn't work out for him, I still think he's just an incredibly talented player. And by the time now he's 24 years old, that really scares me in the backcourt. You have Jaquan Walton and Jordan Brown. Jordan Brown was a machine last year at Louisiana, given, granted, there's a little bit of a lower level there being played. But I think that this Memphis team is just so old that they have the ability to gel it a little bit faster and ultimately take a road victory in Columbia.
I can tell you with certainty that the Tigers are going to win this game. Yep. I'm going to go with the Missouri Tigers. Dennis Gates is the reason for me. He is an incredible coach. He proved that last year with a very talented Missouri team. I know they've lost a little bit of that talent, but they still have a lot of it. And for the same reasons as both of you, Penny Hardaway hasn't been able to figure it out really with Memphis. And there's just, again, another season where they go into a year and we don't know what Memphis team we're going to get. What players are going to be on the court for this game? Who knows? You got to go with the team that you know more about. And to me, that's Missouri.
Yeah, that was my logic too. So to end off each of these game pick segments, we're going to each pick an upset pick. There's no real criteria for what qualifies as an upset. This won't be getting tracked in our scoring system. It's kind of just like a judgment call, but just a fun thing to do at the end. So my upset is going to be Tuesday night, UNC Asheville beating Michigan. We talked about UNC Asheville early on in our top 100 with Drew Pember returning, and he did not move up, but he stayed at the Big South level. There are multiple legit high major players on that team, in my opinion, and I did go down as a Michigan apologist, more in the mid-tier of our top 100 rankings. We talked about Michigan, and I said they're not going to be as horrendous as Ben thinks, but this roster does look pretty bleak at the same time. Torvik has the projected spread, I think, around 9.5, but I think UNC Asheville wins outright.
I thought there was no way. You had mentioned it was like, oh, yeah, I'm picking a Big Ten school. I was like, well, I'm looking around, and I see UNC Asheville and Michigan. I was like, there's no way Dan's going to pick that because he just, he can't turn back on his word earlier in the season, but I guess he can. I'll go ahead and tell you mine. This one's going to be on Friday night. I like Yale over Gonzaga as an interesting pick. Yale is super experienced, has a lot of returning players, especially playing a Bulldogs team that I think we're a little bit concerned about how it's going to all fit together. They did look really good in their scrimmage, I will say, for that part. But scrimmage is a scrimmage. This is a real game. Yale is the best team in the Ivy League. The spread, according to Torvik, right now is about 11, and I think it's going to be a lot closer than that. Yale has a chance to win outright, in my opinion.
I'm going with UNC losing to Radford. A Radford team that last year was pretty solid at 21-15. But you look at what they did against the mid-major team, the power conference teams they played. At Marquette, lost by 10. At Notre Dame, lost by 3. At Kansas State, lost by 8. They stayed in these games with, power conference teams. If you want to call Notre Dame that, be my guest. But the other two teams are pretty good. And then we see what Radford brings back this year. Daquan Smith and Brian Antoine, their top 2 leading scorers, are back. That's the same Brian Antoine that played for Villanova for the first 3 years of his career. So he's not going to be afraid of this North Carolina team. I'm sure he gets his guys ready for this. They got a couple other pieces as well, including their leading rebounder, Justin Archer. He'll be back. He's going to need to play well against Armando Bacot, of course. But it also always just seems like North Carolina has at least 1 or 2 games against these mid-major opponents that they struggle with. I don't have them off the top of my head, but I just feel like that's the case. And I can see Radford coming in and winning this game.
I cannot wait to see what the social media narratives will be if Radford goes out and knocks off UNC in the opening night. I cannot wait. I mean, we'll come back next Sunday night, which, by the way, that's what we'll be doing throughout the regular season. Yep. Every Sunday night, 9 o'clock Eastern time, we'll be doing a live show, recapping the previous week, previewing the next week. And we'll give our nice, measured takes, but I cannot wait to see what would happen. Either way, that will do it for today's edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. Thanks, everyone, for listening live. If you have, be sure to subscribe to our channel if you have not already. We appreciate that, trying to get those numbers up and really grow throughout this season. We have a lot of great content coming out all throughout the CBB Review podcasting network, so be sure to check all that out. Once again, everyone, thanks for watching and listening, and take care.